So we'll talk about strategy and tactics for banking APIs this year. Yeah, every year I write the reports about banking APIs since 2015. One of the conferences I organize every year is about banking APIs. So we have a specific focus on that topic. Banking APIs and open banking. So the thing we will see are the 4 pressure for banking to open APIs. Right? And we can have a discussion later, but the logistics industry is also under this pressure. The healthcare industry is also under this pressure. Not as much regulations, but it's coming. Right? It's coming. In Europe, some energy providers, right, also are afraid of regulation. So yeah, regulation will oblige companies to open APIs, right, for the customer experience and to liberate the data. So how banks should react on these pressure, right? What's the strategy and tactics? How to use technology? And final words. Right? Let's go. So there are 4 pressure, right? 4 pressure for companies. So the first is the big players, right? The big giant digital native players. So for the Western world, like Europe and the US, it's mostly the GAFAs, and even like Southeast Asia, it's more the GAFAs, like the Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon. I'm sure Samsung here also have a lot of power, and they all have banking license, payment license. Sorry, they all have payment license, so they can already make payment available, but they could be banks tomorrow. I've talked to some managers on these companies, and they tell me under the radar that they're afraid of regulation. Right? Regulation takes too much energy to compliance regulations, you know, and like systemic banks takes too much energy to focus, and they're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed. They're not used to do that. But let's say that they're ready. When the opportunity will be here, they will be ready to be financial institution also tomorrow, right? Amazon just reached the 100 million Amazon Prime users, so they could transform them into banking customer like easily tomorrow, right? Amazon is already doing lending, right, for small businesses. Google have payment, Google Payments, Google Wallets, Apple Pay, Samsung has Samsung Pay here, right? So all these companies, and actually they are the biggest valuation in most of the country where they have their headquarters. Right? And you can see that they have all payment license, and as I said you earlier, they were Amazon looking to buy a bank in the US, right? Facebook allow payments, directly payments. Alibaba buys MoneyGram, so to do the payments. Alibaba has Alipay. So Apple have a lot of Apple Pay users, so yeah, they're ready to take over the financial market. And as Bill Gates said in the 1996, I think, it was, we will need banking, but we may not need banks to do banking, right? So it was a blessing. It was thinking forward. So the fintech landscape. So the first pressure is the big, let's say, native digital giants. The second pressure is the startup and fintech ecosystem. So it's another landscape. So I don't design this one. So you will have access to it if you want, but it's here it's 1,400 companies, right? So 1,400 companies on many topics. For all these companies, it's more than $100 billion in funding. Right? So a lot of investors really trust about the fact that, yeah, we will do banking without banks. Almost $1 trillion in value, right? And 50% allocated in the US, right? 50%. But let's say Asia is really ramping up with more and more companies. Right? And so we saw that earlier with another diagram. But let's say it's the same diagram here, you know, when startup takes over, you know, when startup takes over the customer experience, then the distribution, then the assets and everything. And so banks will be just released as raw materials, infrastructure, and some assets, right? So it's the same thing here. So startups are doing that, and they will do that in the fintech landscape. So yeah. So let's see 4 examples about how currently fintechs are disrupting banks on the different part of the stack, right? You remember infrastructure, assets, distribution, and customer. So it's a little bit like that, right? So now we have the bank license, which is even below the infrastructure. Bank license, infrastructure, distribution, products, right? So some companies, some new players, they just make the banking products. So actually they have branches. They try to revolutionize the way we do banking in branches. But for that, they use banking distribution, right, products, banking infrastructure, and banking license. So they just do the final mile to the customer, right, the last mile to the customer. Another bank, native digital bank, Simple, they do the products, they do the final lending and debit card or stuff like that. But they also do the distribution. They have their own app. They have their own app they distribute to all potential customers, right? And they rely on banking infrastructure and banking license. Actually, they have been acquired. They have been acquired by BBVA. Some other banks, like Hello Bank, they do everything themselves, the product, the distribution, the infrastructure. They just rely on a banking license from someone else. So actually, it's a subsidiary of a big bank. And but they do the full stack. And some banks are full stack already. They do the product, distribution, infrastructure, and they have their own license. This is a full digital native company, right? This is a full digital native company, and also this company has been acquired by a big bank, right? So we will see later, most of the time, the strategy for banks to protect themselves is to acquire, right? So it's already beginning. This is what I want to say. And they use APIs for that. Everybody uses APIs for that. And this one provides APIs on the top, right? So it's APIs everywhere. So how they differ, how the digital native banks differ, because they are completely mobile first, API first, they can be a lot more flexible, right? They have faster processing time, flexibility, flexible infrastructure. Because they are startup, they can attract talents, right? They are mostly branchless because of mobile apps, and they have a lot of percentage per cost compared to income, which is really, really low. Right? Where traditional banks are more rigid, long processing times, low talent attractivity because of the lack of technology innovation, right? They have a strong network of branch, but that can cost a lot of money. So yeah, it costs, bless you, it costs a lot for them to operate, right? So APIs, we'll see how APIs can make that faster. So the third force, so first force is the big native digital giants, right? Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Alibaba, Samsung, and others, right? The second one is the fintechs and the startup, which are highly funded by venture capitalists. The third one is regulation. So this is actually where regulations are coming. So the main one is PSD2 in Europe, right? All Europe. UK was one of the first to open API regulations, but let's say like the European regulation took over a little bit the lead on that. Canada is thinking about making regulation. Japan is thinking about making regulation. Australia just opened last February a regulation about obliging banks to open APIs. Singapore also is taking that path. And just recently, Mexico, so Mexico here, and India, right, and South Africa have published, or they said they will really, in a few weeks, publish regulations about opening APIs, right? So yeah, so now it's become mandatory. And the reason why is because for many, many years, banks did not innovate. They were really capturing the customer. And at some point, politicians say, no, you need we will force you to innovate, so you will be obliged to open assets. You will be obliged to open account information or payment initiation. You will be obliged to open your infrastructure to innovative ecosystem. So now banks have a decision. Do they embrace APIs, or just do they comply with API regulation? Most of them wants to embrace and completely change themselves, but let's say they have a lot of difficulty to do that, right? Because they don't have the culture and the tools. Yeah, so in the report, so that's the 2018 report, so you will have access to that report. So we take examples from banking portals from from many places in the world. And yeah, so the last force is the customer expectation. So I've read this morning that in Korea, which is a highly digital company, 90% of bank customers use digital channels to access to banking, right? So 90% is really huge. It's one of the top countries of the world. So yeah, banks needs to think differently, right? Banks need to think differently. Because the customer expectations are changing, and banks cannot change as fast. So 4 forces: big native digital companies, customer expectations are changing, fintech startups are trying to disrupt them with a lot of money, right? Like Stripe here. Stripe, I remember, $10 billion in 7 years, right? And it will be growing, right? And yes, the regulatory pressure, right? About the regulations. So banks are really crushed. So what they are doing. So now they say we need to invest in culture. So going from a top-down culture to a bottom-up, focus more on agility, better manage talents, better manage partnerships, integrations, better do merger and acquisition. But also in technology, they think about design, mobile first, API first, identity management, AI, artificial intelligence, containers, so the whole stack, the new banking stack, right? That is coming, right? And APIs is a really important part of it, but we'll see how now. So as we said earlier for the business strategy, so what banks try to do, same here, banks have a small part of the market, and they compete with other banks to have bigger parts. So the idea is to have the same idea, right? But for banks, yeah, it's even more critical. It's even more critical because what's the difference from a bank to another bank, right? I don't know in Korea, but in many places in the world, it's not a big difference. So an important phrase that comes to APIA's conferences, banking that I organize, is that it's not the small who eat the big, so it's not the startup who will eat the bank, but it will be the fast who will eat the slow. And in nature, it's often like that, right? You can be bigger or smaller. The most important is to be faster, right? So you can escape, or you can chase the other, right? So yeah, and so banks they're not afraid of startups directly, because they have more money and resource at some point. But they're afraid of being too slow and taking over, right? Taking over. Remember the graph I showed you that when they take the customer experience and then they go down? This is exactly what they're afraid of, to be disintermediated because of their speed. And why they do that? Because it's a European survey, but 80% of bank expenses are from maintaining software, maintaining legacy systems, in average. In average, 11% of costs are for one-time use code, right? Specific marketing campaigns or specific applications. So in average, there is only 9% of expenses who are for refactoring the legacy or making a middle-term or long-term infrastructure choices. Right? That's not a lot, right? That's not a lot. Just imagine you have a mortgage when you have 80% of interest and you reimburse only 9% of the capital, right? You would consider you over debt, right? So yeah, so this is technical debt here. So the idea with APIs, as we saw earlier, is to refactor the banking stack, right? So refactoring the banking stack is, as we say in development, refactoring is changing the structure without changing the behavior. So changing the organization, optimize, but not changing the outputs. You don't change the input and outputs, you just change the way it's organized and optimized, right? So this is the idea that we saw before. So the schema is not there, but the idea. So if you have an API, an interface that is designed towards the business capability, right? So the service below, right? You will be able to build another service, right? Like the brick, right? And little by little, you will be able to replace the brick, right, with other services or microservices. And if you keep the same interface, right, you will not break clients. It's the same thing as I saw earlier, but I insist. So this can help you to refactor the existing infrastructure. When you have all really big monolithic application, you can replace little by services, right? Thanks to what we call an API facade. An API facade is you make an API on top, right? Just to make the middleware between the implementation and the use case, and then you will be able to change, right? So, and that can help to the refactoring, right, of the system. So how banks are doing it on infrastructure? So let's say the pattern that I see often, like for banks who begin their API first architecture, is that they decouple in 3 layers. There is the system of record layer, which is a deep layer. Right? There is the business workflow layer, and there is the last mile to the customer. Right? So what does that mean? This infrastructure core API is transaction, security, decision, product engine, ledger, core banking. Right? The platform system APIs are authentication, authorization, fraud detection, know your customer, credit score, things that are useful internally, but that can be open to specific selected partners, right? And then you have the product experience APIs, right? Account creation, personas, prediction bots, personal assistant, right? Skills, whatever, right? Mobile application, right? Specific features, so yeah. And these 3 layers, let's say, are defining how the infrastructure is built, right? I'll just go back 1 second. So here it's mostly long-term APIs, right? Really internal, not meant to be open, and just actually to transform implementation of ERPs or really deep core banking features, right? To serve them, to make them serve capabilities on top, right? On the system level, on the business level, right? So it's really that. Then you have these APIs layers here, which are more middle term. They can evolve. So these ones don't evolve a lot, right? These ones evolve a little bit. This one can evolve a lot, right? It's really the last mile to the customer. They're here to follow the customer needs, right? So this is a classic banking distribution. This is a classic banking distribution. You have the people here. I don't know if you see it. Not so much. So here are some people, right? Some people here. And then you have the physical distribution and the non-physical distribution, the online digital distribution of banking products. So banks have banking products, people to sell it, and they sell it to branch or online or digitally to people, right? The customer, all right? So there are 4 strategies that current banks and native digital banks are adopting, and we will see these 4 strategies, all based on APIs. The first one is integration. So I call it integration. So the banks own its infrastructure, the system process APIs that build the platforms, the experience APIs. So banks is doing their own products to the customers here, right? So a few examples. Monzo Monzo, it's a new digital native bank, right? So complete full bank on mobile, right? But actually they just made an app, a specific API for a specific app to work with Deliveroo. Right? Deliveroo is a kind of, I don't know if you have Deliveroo here, or you have probably copycats of Deliveroo's. It's a, let's say, food delivery company. Right? It's a food delivery. But Monzo, it's a bank, it's a digital bank. And actually, they opened an API to integrate with Deliveroo. So when you are with friends and you order food, it's easy to share the bill. Right? So it was an API that's not open to everybody. It's just open to Deliveroo to make the application. Right? So that's full integration. Right? So they control the integration. Right? They control for what they want. Another example is Hello Bank. So Hello Bank. They have an API that they integrated, right, directly on real estate websites. They integrated on real estate websites. So when you book a meeting to visit an apartment, you can directly have the loan ready, so you are able to sign if it's the right one. You don't have to need to wait, right? So that's another way. But again, it's a private API that they expose. Just for that use case, nobody else is able to use it. So this is what I call full integration strategy. Curve also is one of the same platform. So Curve, it's a bank who has a specific integration with accounting companies, like Xero, QuickBooks. So when you access to the customer Xero to customer QuickBooks, you can have all these recent invoices, right? Or all these recent payments. So it's easier to make good banking, good lending, and everything. But again, it's a specific API integration. The other strategy is what I call the ecosystem strategy. Right? So in purple, this is what the banks own, again. Infrastructure, system process APIs, platform, experience APIs. But let's say the bank is just making a small part of the product. The bank allows others to build products thanks to their APIs, right? So they open APIs to others. This is the majority of open banking today. This is the majority. Some current banks open APIs to startups and to partners. So this is the majority of strategy. And then you still have the people there. So what does that mean? That means the banks open APIs, but still have their own apps. It's like if you are building house, you sell house to people, but you also sell bricks of the house for people to build their own house, or to build a house for others, right? So you do the both sides. But the problem with that is that you compete with your customer, right? You compete with your ecosystem. But but you're still playing on both sides. So an example, Revolut, it's one of this kind of app, right? Because it's a digital native bank who open APIs to other partners, right? And so they enable to make different, let's say, use cases based on their APIs, right? And so to complement, but also compete with them. Right? Another example is Mint. So Mint is the consequence of opening APIs, right? So Mint, they do an aggregation. They do a bank aggregation platform. So most of the time you have one bank app and then one other bank app and one other bank app because they don't want to cooperate. Mint use banking APIs to make a unified multiple account banking management platform. So you have access to only one app, but maybe 10, 15, 20 accounts. Right? So they are using APIs to compete with the bank and disintermediate the bank. So actually Mint has been acquired by Intuit, accounting company early. Yeah, they have millions and millions of users in North America. Right? So this is the trade-off, right? You have an ecosystem, you learn from the ecosystem, but sometimes the ecosystem takes over you, right? Then the third strategy is the platform. So actually now it becomes really tricky. So for these banks, The infrastructure is still owned, the process APIs, the platform, the experience APIs, but the banks don't want to make any more products. When I say products, it's like digital products or apps or everything, right? They say that they will lose the fight, so they want the ecosystem and the partners, and so to build the apps for them, right? You know, because they say they will be too slow, right? So there are two banks who are adopting this strategy. So Starling, which is again a digital native new bank. So Starling they just make the base application banking, and they let other make integration on their marketplace. Insurance, fraud detection, car loans, mortgage, you know, every of these products are made by others on top of their platforms, right? But they say we will not make all the products ourselves. We just make the base application and we take a fee out of what we sell to people, right? There is also BBVA. So BBVA is this huge Spanish world bank, right? In South America and in Spain and in the US even. So BBVA, contrary to some other banks who have app stores, BBVA says stop to app stores. They have an API store. So the BBVA say we will stop selling the apps, we will just sell the bricks. And it's funny to say that they have, for example, a retail customer API, but just for Spain. A retail account just for Spain. The same retail account just for USA, right? The same customer API just for USA. And they have the same for Mexico and for same countries. So they really productize every brick depending on the country and depending on the use case. They just sell the APIs, so they are completely shifting strategy, right? To be a platform, a real platform. So their role now is to deliver the best tools and the best experience for developers, the best bricks, not the best house, because they cannot imagine all the house people will want to build, right? And then you have the last one, which is at some point risky, but some new players are trying to do that. And it's funny, it's not even banks. So here, the banks own this infrastructure, the core banking system process APIs, but they don't want to be a platform, and they don't want to have the APIs on top, and they don't want to make the products. Right? So that's really risky about the potential revenues, right? But being an infrastructure, also is like Amazon Web Services can be, if you're really good and the best, you can have a lot of revenues. But you're killing a lot of value on the market, right? You know, because you were capturing the customer value, and now you're just providing infrastructure, right? So, but again, some banks are thinking about that. But the players who do that, so two examples. So Solaris or SAB, they are banking IT solution vendors, and they sell core banking as a service. So, for example, Solaris, you can be a bank tomorrow. No, they have all the tools, they have everything to help you to be a bank, but you will pay by the user, like €5 per month or €15 per month, $50 depending on what you ask in the core banking as a service, right? No. So that's really interesting strategy. I don't see any bank, but I see IT vendor for banking services adopting that. So a lot of banks also wants to think that there will be an infrastructure for identity, right? Because they're really good on security. They say at some point we will just an identity provider, right? But they are challenged worldwide with the blockchain technology, right? Which are more decentralized and stuff like that. At least in San Francisco, a lot of companies are tackling that. So Blockstack just raised like 52 million to be an identity layer, and so these companies also made huge ICOs. And here, there are existing social logins like Google and Facebook and many others who also have a huge market share about identity and authorization and delegation. Right? So even banks want to be identity infrastructure. Let's say they're really challenged. Right? So this is to sum up these 4 strategies. Either bank are integrators. They have APIs that they open just for specific use case, right? they control the distribution and they control the product building, right? They control the APIs and where it will be delivered, right? And the experience. Some can be ecosystem, like Microsoft. They do their own products and APIs, but they let people do what they want with them, right? So like Windows and everything, right? When it's on a computer, you can do whatever with the computer, right? Whatever the computer. Then you can have a more platform strategy like Salesforce. Like what a lot of banks are trying to do is that you control the distribution, right? You accept or not specific apps, but you let them do what they want to do, right? You don't check especially where they want to do it. And then you have the last one, which is a big question mark today, is about who will be the infrastructure for banking. Who will be providing the core banking APIs for everybody else, right? To allow everybody to be a bank, even non-banks to be a bank, right? Or to have banking features, right? So this, I don't know yet. Most of the banks are here, trying to be platform, but here, will they allow anybody to access and distribute the data, the APIs? So this is something I don't know yet, but yeah. At some point, the plan B of many banks is to be here. I will finish by, we made a survey about top startup CTOs, about what do they expect about banking APIs, what is the most important for them. So we asked them to the top 5 requirements. And the first one was for an API, of course it needs to have value, that's mandatory. But the first thing, they need reliability and performance. The API needs to be up and working well and always, right? Because if the banking API is slow, it may make their application slow. Right? So the second thing, they ask a testing sandbox that reproduce the real API behavior. So the thing is that if you give them testing environment, that's great. But to be sure that it reproduces the same real production environment, because if you don't do that, they will have to redo the whole integration. And yeah, you don't want that for a good CTO and partnership experience. All these startups has raised more than $5 million, so they are serious about integrations, right? The third thing, they ask a documentation up to date with sample, right? With sample code they can copy and paste, right? Or SDKs they can integrate, right? So they want code. They want to make banks to make them life easier, right? The fourth, they ask a great developer experience. So, and most of them say that the biggest issue of a developer experience is the legal process. Because you sign up to a bank account, you sign up to a bank platform, and to access to the API, sometimes you have to wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, just to access to the API because of due diligence, right? And so you don't want that. They ask a sandbox that you can use right away with fake data that reproduce the real production API. So when they sign up for legal process, they can begin the integration and tests. So when the legal process accepts, they can directly integrate. So that's what they ask, right? They also ask the fact that you give them always things to do, right? Like a sandbox or testing or documentation, and you don't, for example, you don't wait too long to give them access to the sandbox, right? So it's the same. It's really the same idea. And you don't ask so much. For example, some banks ask you have to open a bank account to the bank, right, to develop the app. But just imagine you make an app that integrates with 50 banks. You will have really to open a real account, send your ID and everything to all 50 banks. So no. So they say don't ask us to open a real bank account in your bank to be a user, right? So this kind of stuff are important. The last one is what they call user personas. Because when developers want to build application, the application will be empty. So they will have no payments, no loans, no credits, no, let's say, money transfer, right? So they cannot simulate directly the user experience. So they can try to imagine, but when they launch their application, people begin to use the app, and they see some user experience bugs. Because we didn't know that women or men do payments more at this time or at this time, right? So they cannot anticipate. So the idea is to give them fake user personas that reproduce real users. Like, oh, on Saturday night they go to the restaurant, on Monday they go lunch with friends, and they go to work, so they take public transport, you know. So you can see real transactions, real payments, real loans, real credits, right? And so when you make the app, you see the app working in real conditions. Fake users, real behavior, real conditions. Right? And so all of this is powered by API management. The fact, as we saw earlier, and we talked about many times, but the fact that you have the API gateway to know always who is using what your APIs, to do what, where he's exporting the data, on what type of domains, right? And what's the use case? You have the consumption, right? You have the consumptions, a part of the gateway, and you have the API portal. You have the developer portal, right? Where people will be able to discover the API, and will be able to begin to integrate, read the documentation, and sign up, right? And see their dashboard, right? So that's what's happening in the banking space, right? And if you have any question, yeah, glad to answer them about how banks are using APIs today in their strategy. Thank you. Who works in the banking industry or fintech industry? Some people.